Writing a PhD thesis is often the first major challenge in a young scholar's academic career. For many candidates, it means learning to carry out independent research over an extended period of time without the help of a pre-established course curriculum. As a consequence, they frequently struggle with issues such as time and resource management. In addition, doctoral students must attempt to find a balance between the new requirements of their personal and academic lives, both of which will generally have come to include greater responsibilities. These may extend from having to fulfill teaching or administrative assignments at their institute or faculty, to making important life decisions such as taking on a side job, moving to a new city or country, or perhaps even forming a family. As if this were not enough, PhD candidates frequently encounter unexpected difficulties and setbacks that affect the progression of their research. As a result, they often find themselves dealing with issues such as self-doubt, lack of motivation, and a general feeling of being isolated from the quote-unquote outside world. All of this means that the relationship between candidates and their supervisors plays a crucial role in ensuring a positive outcome to the endeavor of crafting a PhD thesis. Now, while we might all know a horror story or two about problematic relationships between candidates and supervisors, we often fail to pay attention to the opposite, cases in which such relationships are particularly fruitful or prolific. With this in mind, the Graduate Academy and the Heidelberg Graduate School for the Humanities and Social Sciences announced a creative writing contest in the spring of 2020, inviting doctoral candidates to share their positive experience of doctoral supervision. The contest results were announced in the summer of 2020, and the Graduate Academy recently published the selected text both in print and in digital form. To complement the publication, we decided to sit down with some of the authors and discuss their submissions as well as their personal thoughts and experiences as PhD students at Heidelberg University. We believe these stories and insights may be of benefit both to prospective as well as current PhD students in order to help them make the most out of this crucial stage in their academic careers. My name is Jara. I'm the coordinator of the text production and writing support services of Heidelberg University's Graduate Academy. Welcome to the second episode of Supervision, Successful PhD Partnerships and Where to Find Them. Sorry, just a quick side note before we begin. This podcast episode was recorded back in November 2021, while a number of the pandemic-related restrictions were still in place here in Germany. Luckily, a lot of the COVID-related issues we talked about have changed in the meantime, but we still decided to keep rather than edit out the ensuing discussion. We believe it is an important document as it reflects how a young generation of academics lived through a time of global crisis and change. We hope you enjoyed the episode. So first of all, welcome both of you. Welcome Yasamin, welcome Hüsnü to the Graduate Academy. I'm really happy that we're able to do this, to physically see each other despite the unfortunate situation with the pandemic, but following all of the necessary regulations, it's still possible for us to meet. I know that we've all become very used to the two-dimensional worlds of seeing people on screens, but I think there's nothing that can really replace actually seeing each other and being able to talk with each other. So thank you so much for taking the time and for visiting us. Today we'll be discussing your experiences of doctoral supervision as well as your submissions to last year's writing contest. I would like to begin by asking you both to introduce yourselves and your research so that our listeners can have a bit of an idea of who you are and what you do. So maybe Yasamin, you would like to go first?
So as you mentioned, my name is Yasamin. Basically, I graduated last year in 2020. It's been more than a year that I graduated from the Faculty of Biosciences. My PhD was at the IPMB, Institute of Pharmacy and Molecular Biotechnology. And we were trying to look into the chemical approaches for the modulation of signaling pathways that are associated with stemness and cancer. I actually applied to Heidelberg University while I was still in Iran, actually. So I did pharmacy back home. Pharmacy is like back home is a PharmD degree. It's basically a 6-year educational program. It's equivalent to a master's degree. So you can basically, because you here it would be like Stats exam or something, so you can directly apply for a PhD. So I was applying all around the world because I had this idea to do my PhD at a world-class university. So Heidelberg was one of them. And it was very, very difficult because when you are out of the system, I'm sure all the international students that are listening to this or will ever listen to this understand what I mean, especially when you are from underprivileged countries. I have to say, I don't want to dramatize, but it's really true, because even if you are qualified enough because you are not familiar with the system and they are not familiar with your system, so you might have way less opportunities if you are applying to, let's say, top-tier universities in the world. Therefore, I was also just crossing my fingers that someone accepts me. And I think I had 2 offers. I got a lot of rejections, and in a way I'm grateful for those rejections because they put me on the right track to something else. I got many, many rejections. I wasn't used to being rejected, I have to say, because I was always a good student, top marks. I'm not just, I don't want to be modest, but it's like, just want to say that it's very normal, because when you're out of the system, it's very normal that, people don't know you. You have to keep being modest and keep proving yourself. This is important. And I'm not really being dramatic, but this is like personal experience,
I think that's really interesting. I think we'll probably in this conversation come up with a couple of other topics that could be really interesting as podcasts on their own. I think today one of the interesting things that we have, and Hüsnü will be able to introduce himself in a minute, but we have here an international circle right now. So I come from South America, Hüsnü from Turkey, you come from Iran, and the last time that we met with Hana and Uli, it was a German circle. And so I think obviously our perspectives on and experiences, in particular these things that you're talking about, are very specific to international people. We know how difficult it actually is, and as you say, even for good students to be able to find a supervisor here that accepts you, because also the German students, a lot of them have the advantage that they already might know their supervisors because they did their masters with them, or because they already have contact through their supervisors in other universities. So I think that's really an interesting point, the whole process of admission at Heidelberg University also from like an emotional perspective. And from,
I think so, because as you said, for me it was very emotional when I was writing this, because I know that those students, I don't know, I'm sure they're all around the world, like they're just sitting on their laptops, they keep sending emails to professors, and a lot of them wouldn't be even read, unfortunately. And I know, because now I can know that what professors reply to, what they don't, what they find ridiculous, and so on. So therefore, I see it from this perspective, and I think it taught me a very valuable lesson also, that the opportunity is way more important than anything else. So if you are given this opportunity, then you know that you should basically maximize the benefit that you are getting out of this opportunity. Because I think individuals, of course, are important. I don't want to be philosophical or something, but individuals are important. But the opportunity that you are given as an individual is, if I say it's not more important, it's equally important. Because in the wrong system, no matter how good you are, you will never achieve what you want to achieve. Whereas if you have both, then you would always flourish, and you would always get what you want if you work hard towards something. So that sounds
really, really,
this is my personal experience, and this was when I saw your email, it was literally the first thing that came to my mind. And because I had also given it a lot of thoughts, and to close friends I had talked about this thing. So this was also I would say, the primary idea of my text, that like
Right.
value the opportunity. If you're given the opportunity, go for the opportunity, even if you think that it might be little for you.
I think you've already started to answer a couple of questions that I will ask you at some point later on.
Yeah.
But before we move on, maybe also, so we had a little bit of a background of what you did at Heidelberg University and how you applied for university. But maybe you can tell us very briefly how you moved on. So you basically already finalized your PhD. How did things turn out once you concluded your PhD? And what are you doing now? What's your kind of like your current objectives and kind of like working environment?
Yeah. So I was lucky. I think I was committed, but I was also lucky that I did, in my opinion, a good PhD. And I developed some sort of interest for a particular research field during my PhD, because when I started my PhD, to be honest, I just knew that I want to do a PhD. I didn't know what I wanted to do afterwards. And that was kind of more from an academic perspective. And I had no clue about this fascinating world of bioscience research and all these. Now I'm in the field of cancer research, but I had no clue about all of this. So bit by bit, I developed this interest, and at the end of my PhD, I wanted to give myself a chance to stay in the field in a way and stay in academia, because I liked my PhD experience. Therefore, I started applying for postdoc positions in the labs where I found their research interesting, and the level was the level that I wanted to work in such an environment. And so and that's how basically I ended up now in Frankfurt, and specifically in Georg Speerhaus. So I do now, I would say, colorectal cancer research. I'm focused on colorectal cancer and metastasis. If, that is not too specific information, but this is right now the discipline that I'm working on. So far,
is this kind of like a continuation, in direct continuation of what you were doing here, or did you all have to kind of like also start anew to a certain extent?
That's a good question, because usually sometimes people continue relatively the same in their postdoc experience, and sometimes, like me, they change quite a bit. I wouldn't say like the change is not like you're moving from one discipline to the other, because it's still biology and it's still like cancer biology and so on, so it's similar. But I have to say that yes, it was pretty new. Like, it was on the newer side of things. It was a challenge. It was learning a lot of new things, and still is there. But that's also the nature of research, that you're always coming up with new questions, new techniques, how to address them. So for me, it was also like this, and so far it has been working. I hope, it goes well, and we will see.
And did you feel more comfortable at this point with the German system as opposed to when you started your PhD here?
It's a very, very good question, because this also showed me that how important it is to be within the system, you know? Because, 5 years or 4 years, my PhD took 4 years, but I came a little before that, so 5 years in Germany. So I knew a bit of German language. Let's start with that. So I knew the system, how the academic system here works, how I should write emails, who I should contact, basically, what are the research institutes, what are the people in the fields, you know, and all these things. So obviously it played a major role. I mean, if I want to compare, let's say if our control is someone that is applying for postdoc positions abroad, then I'm already like 10 steps ahead of them, because I know all of these things, you know? So in that sense, of course, it made a difference.
Great. Wow. I think this is something that I would be interested in doing at a later point, is focusing really on the international experience. And it's always really important to have feedback of people who went through the whole process and how they experienced that and how they came out of that. So that's really great input. Now, I would like to move over to you, Hüsnü, basically with the same question, really briefly, to introduce yourself to our listeners and what you do. So go ahead, and I'll ask you a couple of additional questions.
Okay. Thank you very much, David, for the invitation, and it's really good to see you, Yasamin, and congratulations for the success. And my name is Hüsnü Yilmaz, and I come from Turkey. I'm a PhD, individual PhD student at the Institute of Political Science of Heidelberg University since 2017. And actually I started with my research with a focus on state-diaspora relations, how national states regulate and arrange their diaspora communities or their connections with diaspora societies abroad. And after almost 3 semesters actually, I changed my focus in terms of my methodology and the case, of my main research, and now I'm trying to understand more the interactions between diaspora communities themselves, how they form themselves, how they interact with each other, and how they react to and relate to each other. It's more ethnographic than, a kind of state-centered or purely, political science research in comparison to the first initial steps of my being here in Heidelberg.
Right.
I studied English language and literature in Istanbul at bachelor's and master's level as well. And in my master's thesis, I analyzed the works of a Turkish immigrant writer in Germany. So my interest actually lies in, my current interest in Turkish diaspora communities in Germany actually lies in my previous, I will say, research on a more text-based, I will say, study in my master's level. And currently speaking, I have just finished my research interviews, which was more than 100, and it was too much work.
Wow. And that's mostly online or exclusively online? How did you?
Yeah, exclusively online.
Wow.
Exclusively online.
So you're an expert on interviewing people and recording stuff online, right?
I will say recording, yeah. But so interviewing is a totally different area,
right?
But I'm happy with, having finished my interviews, but there waits, too much work still in terms of the transcription and analysis of those, recordings and the interviews.
Was it a difficult decision to reconceptualize? I think it's kind of like a brave decision to reset it. And so how do you feel about that right now? Are you happy that you did that?
Well, so I think it's going to take 2 more years to see the end of my research. I would like to be a little flexible in this case. Yeah. In 2 years' time, finishing my research in 2 years time will be really good, but flexibility is always there.
So you're not really putting yourself under too much pressure to say I have to finish in exactly that amount of time, but you kind of will adapt to how the research develops and the things that you find out.
And I'm thankful in this regard to my supervisor that he is also flexible, and he was the key factor again who advised me to redesign my research with a new methodological focus and with a new focus on a research group, let me say, group of population, I will say, immigrant population, and he knows that I'm following the research, and we are in contact and we exchange ideas.
That's also a really interesting point. We might actually touch on that later on. I think it's definitely a brave decision after you've already put in all of that energy to reconceptualize it and change it. And I think it's a great thing that you could do that with the support of your supervisor and didn't have a major conflict. So that's a great thing.
May I interrupt?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, because it was interesting because I could translate this experience maybe to the natural sciences as well, because it happens also often that, in the middle we even change the question. But what was interesting for me, because you mentioned that you changed your methodology, but was it based on the information that you actually had gotten from your interviews, or I guess so, because we said in a way that, okay, so those things that you have done so far, they basically, I want to say they're not going to go to trash, but they rather inspire something else. I want to emphasize on this, because in natural sciences it happens quite a lot that we change the question, but it doesn't mean that what we have been doing for the past 2 years or 3 years is going to go to trash. It just means that it led us to somewhere else, you know. Is it like this also in your case?
So it's a good question, Yasamin. Thank you very much. I mean, I actually did not change totally my focus. I'm still on diaspora studies, migration and diaspora studies. So I just changed my focus. Right. And also that has changed my methodology. I'm just beginning with a basic assumption that diaspora, formations come through, regularly and based on or in relation to kind of domestic politics. Here, namely, based on the domestic politics back in Turkey. So I'm not going to put everything into trash, as you mentioned. So I'm going to
that was a bit of an extreme,
and diaspora theories and migration theories there. I will use them.
I think that's a great point, and I think that's also a very lucky thing for you that you can actually really use what you're already doing and change the focus. I do know of people who have drastically changed their topics, and in humanities that can happen, that you actually completely decide, I just don't like the topic, I'm going to focus on a completely new project. And I think that's also kind of like another category of like saying, I'll throw this away because it really doesn't satisfy me and start something anew. And I think obviously in an ideal case, you can make something out of that knowledge that you accumulated.
Definitely.
So maybe one last question in the regard to like your current situation. Do you have any kind of like ideas of what you want to do once you finalize? Are you also like looking like Yasamin to going on to like a postdoc, or would you like to work in academia directly or work in kind of like other areas? What's kind of like your objective do you have objectives at this point for after the PhD is handed in? Yeah,
actually I can do two things: continue with a postdoc, or teach English, which I did actually back in Turkey before my PhD here in Germany. But after I came to Germany, I realized that there is a third option, which actually stems from the fact that Germany is a country of migration. And there is too much research on migration, diaspora, and integration outside the academia as well. Moving from this fact, I think I will most probably look for, career opportunities outside the academia instead of, initiating or getting myself involved in a postdoc study.
But I think in the humanities, a lot of people, once they finish their PhD, kind of like have the chance to really think, well, do I stay in the academy or can I actually use my knowledge outside of it?
But in natural sciences, it's also, I think, having done your PhD, I think this is also like a turning point. You should decide what you want to do. For me, it's an ongoing question, basically. Okay. If I want to stay in academia, or if a lot of people move to industry or other jobs, especially in our field, like I think industry is even, especially regarding the payments and so on, is even more attractive. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. Unfortunately, there is a decrease of, I say unfortunately, but not a lot of people would probably agree, but there is a decrease of interest in staying in academia for a lot of reasons. But
we also had a similar discussion, funnily enough, with Hannah and Uli concerning the attractiveness and kind of like the possibilities that academia can actually offer young scholars. Most of us agree in that there's a lot that could be done to make academia more attractive. We should really go in depth to respond to this, but I think it's a very valid question. We might come up or come back to you guys on that in the future. Okay, so we've already spent a lot of time discussing the introductory topics, but I think it shows how much how many interesting things we could come up with to talk about. I would like to go back though to now questions to you both concerning our writing contest. So you, Yasamin, already kind of like more or less answered the next question, but still maybe a quick rewind back to your decision to participate in our contest. So you already said that you were basically finishing your dissertation and you saw this and were immediately felt inspired to participate and write something. Was it actually difficult for you to come up with something in writing, or was it something that you just like sat down and wrote it down in an evening and had it ready?
Ah, that's a good question. Actually, I clearly remember how I started, and I even remember because my laptop got broken in between.
Oh, really?
So this is a memory I will never forget. I clearly remember because I was preparing for my PhD defense. I was at home studying, and so it was a perfect environment because I was always at home. It was peaceful, and yeah, it was perfect for writing. I think I mentioned that immediately when I saw it, it was like such a great opportunity and such a great idea of you and your colleagues to come up with such a opportunity for PhD students. I don't think I had a lot of ideas in mind, but I wanted it in a nice way, so that took me quite some time. To basically coming up with a title, with an outline of what to say or what not to say. I have to say I love writing a lot. Actually, I think I mentioned before we started recording that, if it were up to me, I would have liked to study literature or something like that. Mm-hmm. But so I'm used to writing. I write a lot for myself, but I had never had this experience of writing like, I would say, a journalist or something, because the style you wanted was more like short sentences, like, or a very short thing to just tackle like a certain question or something, and it had to be answered like within 2 pages or something. So this was a bit, it took me maybe a week or so, and then when I wrote everything, my laptop was broken. I didn't have a backup on my iCloud. But it was so much in my mind that when I started writing it again, like words will just come easily because I had thought about it a lot.
Great. What about you, Hüsnü? How did you come up? What motivated you to participate and submit an entry to our call?
Well, it's a platform. I mean, the contest itself, as it is expressed in the announcement of the contest, is a platform to share the experiences and views of, graduate students. But for me, it was an opportunity to say thank you to my supervisor. I tried, many universities, I tried many professors. I contacted them and expressed my interest in continuing my, resume, in a sense, suspended PhD abroad. And it was a real chance for me to make a new beginning. And I just wanted to say thank you and express my gratitude to my supervisor. And on the other hand, the flexibility of the contest was quite helpful for me as well. You gave the freedom to us, to choose, to come up with, ideas and the formulations of the stories that we had. And when these two, came together, so it was quite easy to set my proposal. Yeah.
Nice. So obviously, my next question to you guys is: did you have a chance to have a look at the other texts that were submitted, and in general, did you have any kind of like thoughts about them, or did you think there were some commonalities or very different perspectives? What were your impressions on the texts in general?
Actually, I would like to begin if it's possible.
Sure, go ahead.
Yasamin, can I read a very short passage from Yasamin's
Go ahead, yes.
text?
Oh,
It reminds me of my past,
Okay,
know, so
go ahead.
It was quite inspiring for me as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Coming from an educational system where we were used to relying on strict and close supervision and to acquiring knowledge mostly through classical means, I had my own struggles at the start of my PhD. I often found myself lost among so many questions related to the project. This was the case for me as well. I come from Turkey, and in Turkey, the educational system is mostly, the teacher-centered. And leading an individual PhD, individual research, as in my case here, was quite challenging in the beginning. And in your sentences as well, I found myself, to an important extent, establishing relations with, colleagues from the department, seeing how they proceeded in their research and how they adapted, new methods or, ideas, critiques and interpretations from others. So I found myself in other excerpts as well. And it was quite illuminating for me, it was quite inspiring for me, and I think it will be the same for the prospective candidates who would like to apply for a PhD or even master's at the University of Heidelberg. So that was quite...
I can totally understand where you're coming from. Maybe you want to address the same issue or something else.
Yeah, because I read your text also very carefully because I think, because in your text also I saw a lot of a difference, but also because in my text, I was focusing mostly that we have to be responsible for our PhDs. And I was coming from this point that even if you are not getting the supervision that you want, it's not like I really like my supervisor and my mentor in the lab. I have still very good relationship with both of them. But just even if this is not the case, and even if you feel that you lack certain aspects of supervision, and it seems very difficult, of course it does, you should still be, I don't want to say be grateful for the opportunity in a sense that I'm grateful and I just gonna tolerate this situation. No, but be active grateful. So basically take matters into your own hands and do something about it. And for example, in Heidelberg, I can say about my field that there are many institutes. We were part of the HGGS Graduate School. There are many postgraduate students you can share your experiences with. You can ask for help. You can ask for their advice. Not even within your lab, but rather, so it's such a great environment, and this is something that has to be valued a little bit more.
Absolutely.
For sure. And about you, because I realized that you have a very close relationship with your supervisor, which is in a very unique, I think. And so because you actually, I feel like your relationship is a little also personal, you see him.
It's more about the characteristics of my supervisor.
Exactly.
It's the distance and stance that he has. He's quite professional. He's really professional, but he knows where to, comes in, so where to come in, and where to, I will say, give a hand, I will say. And definitely it's also connected to how I proceed on what I do and how I take my research seriously and continuously. But the personality and the attitude of the supervisor himself or herself, I think, is the most decisive point in having this, I will say.
And feeling the support, and that was, I found also very important, because you may not need that support, but having the support makes you actually braver in your steps. And gives you a little bit of security, and we all know that academia is not so secure, especially for young scientists or young scholars. So it's, I think, I really liked this part.
I think that's a really nice point. Any other commentaries on the other entries?
Unfortunately, I read the rest quite a while ago, and I read Hüsnü's text yesterday, actually. So I don't remember the details of the previous texts, but I realized that my text was a bit different from the rest, because the rest were more pinpointing at close relationship with their supervisor, whereas I was mostly talking about just focus on yourself and look for alternative ways, even if you think that this is not sufficient or something. But I guess that makes it interesting because everyone has a different experience also.
I'll definitely come to that. I think nobody will say everything is perfect in during a PhD research project, but I think all of you guys managed to find the positive aspect to it. What I would like to ask you guys, though, because the time is running, I knew this was going to happen, so don't worry about this. But
it's all about the interviews, exactly. So time runs.
I think we are both very talkative.
Yes, but that's not a problem. But just to move on a little bit, maybe one thing that we haven't really talked about, and I'd be interested in your in both of your perspectives on this, but what do you guys think might be the major challenges for PhD students at the moment in terms of supervision, considering particularly the current situation with the pandemic? So can you, maybe in your case, you're going still through your PhD project within the pandemic. Yasamin, you managed to get out of it before the pandemic started.
Yeah, I think I was lucky. Pandemic came at the right time because I was writing my thesis. Then it was perfect. I was just sitting at home and writing. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts or ideas on how students currently are dealing with that? Is it a major issue maybe for PhD students? And
I think, Hüsnü, you are the better person to answer this question. But if I want to say briefly, well, I started my postdoc during the pandemic.
Right.
And since I had to learn a lot of new things, of course, as a PhD holder, you are a little more experienced in learning new things, but still, like, it was quite of a challenge for me because colleagues were not around. We were working in shifts, and even the simplest things like where this is or where that is, like, I had to figure this out by myself. So my sympathy goes to everyone who started a PhD during the pandemic, because that is probably even more difficult. I think it really depends on the discipline. For wet lab scientists, I think it's very difficult because if there is a new thing, someone really has to show you. And if things don't work, you have to troubleshoot. And then this means that you have to be in the lab. You can't just stay home. And if you stay home, then you wouldn't have a progress, more or less.
What you're saying is interesting because in your text you talk about this whole thing, and I'll ask you specifically about this in a second, but you talk about how important these connections are to other people surrounding you and not exclusively just the supervisor. And I think probably that is one of the major drawbacks of the current situation with the pandemic, because all of these kind of like random running into somebody, maybe mentioning something that you're dealing with, just like these random chance meetings and crossings of words and communication that is not scripted, make a lot of what you're talking about in your text about this network of support that you have just by being there.
Yeah.
And so I can imagine a lot of people probably not even knowing that exists, kind of like don't have all of this additional support that you have just by interacting with people in your lab on a daily basis.
Exactly.
So I think that's
totally.
really...
Yeah, I think you summarized it very, very nicely. Yeah, it's totally what I meant, basically, because especially if you do not know what you are doing, especially with sophisticated techniques, no matter how experienced you are, someone has to be around, show you the tricks of something, because you don't want to explode the lab or something, or make a huge mistake or something. So this is very important, of course, and this is missing. And also there are some, I also thought about it a lot, because there are some stuff that you really learn by casual talks, by small talks, for example, I give you I think it's a very tangible example. Like, I have never worked with mice before. I have never done in vivo studies. And there are a lot of things about this mice work that you only learn by casual talking, you know?
Okay, right,
I mean, you're laughing, but it's really true. For example, I don't know, the duration of pregnancy. Of course, you can Google it, but when someone is just telling you, it just sticks to your mind. A lot of very minor details that affect your planning a lot. It can save maybe up to 6 months or something.
Because it might not be things that you actually take into consideration. And then you're talking with somebody and they mention it and you're like, oh, I hadn't even thought that was relevant.
I hadn't even thought about it, exactly. But when you're working in shifts, or you're alone in the office, or you're just by yourself all the time.
This doesn't happen anymore.
This just doesn't happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a really good, and it would be really interesting also to ask kind of on a more general, in a general environment, whether that people are feeling that as well. But yeah, absolutely, that's a good point.
I will agree with most of the points you raised. Both of you. It's the same. I'm a kind of classical type of learner. So I like the campus feeling. I like to spend time, together with my colleagues, my friends from the department. Personal interactions are much better. Functional, I will say, for me, rather than online ones. And the good thing about online I would say interaction is that, or online research is that. I mean, you have many options. You have millions of options. I mean, online seminars, workshops. I mean, so lots of things. But I will here, share one of my experiences in the sense that one has to keep focused on his or her research, not to, lose track in a sense. So, given the given the diversity of opportunities in terms of workshops, again seminars, again conferences, again to follow, not to attend. So one has to be really careful with keeping focused.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
on track. So that was one of the issues that I found really difficult to realize in my case. But on the other hand, I will say, being in the campus, physically, and having the opportunity to exchange ideas in the company of tea or coffee, it's more natural for me to see progress in my own research. As you mentioned, an idea and advice.
It's more inspiring.
Definitely, and
Definitely.
most of the development, if there is a development in my research, came through, with the help of those interactions.
Right.
And I'm happy that we are, slowly, going back to normality in terms of coming together again.
I think, I can completely agree with what you're saying, and actually, both Hannah and Uli mentioned very similar things. This whole thing of like feeling isolated, having trouble concentrating and focusing are definitely an issue. And I think also, again, what you're talking about, how much influence just the everyday life, campus life can have on your thought process. So when I think about back to when I was doing my PhD, things like, as you said, just like sitting down for lunch and then somebody saying, yeah, how's it going? You're like, no, I just like stuck with this thing. And then you start explaining it to somebody, and suddenly as you're explaining it, you find the solution because you're just like, you're not concentrating that hard, but suddenly you say something like, wait, that makes sense. Oh, I'm going to go back and check it out. That kind of like very random, very off the hand thing that happens spontaneously on campus that definitely is missing is just very, very nice points. Thank you for these insights. So we're finally reaching the end of our podcast interview, but I will not finish without addressing each of your texts specifically, and I have one or two questions to each of you. So I would like to start with you, Yasamin.
Yeah.
So one of the main observations that you make in your text is that doctoral supervision can be conceived as being much broader than merely the dual relationship between PhD candidates and their supervisors. And in this regard, you call attention to the fact that good supervisors often turn out to be also good social connectors.
Yeah.
On the other hand, though, you problematize the common issue of supervisors being overworked and thus lacking the time to dedicate to their students. Mm-hmm. So would you say that these issues are connected? In other words, is this just a byproduct of supervisors being overworked, or is it something to be strived for as an extension of that relationship of supervision?
I think if I understood your question correctly, yes, because I do mention that usually, especially with big professors, if they have especially the teaching responsibilities and administrative responsibilities and so on, they usually have little time to supervise on a day-to-day basis. That's true. But on the other hand, I meant as a solution, what they can do is that they can build an environment in their labs where people are helping each other. Is that your question? Did I get it wrong?
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So I think what I mentioned is that, okay, if you either can have a hierarchy in your lab. Of course, it depends on the funding of the lab and what kind of resources you have. But where, for example, I supervise the less experienced person, I'm responsible, or something like that, like a postdoc and a PhD, or a junior PI and a postdoc, or something like that. Or what we call, it's a term that I borrowed, I think, peer mentorship, like where people are actually helping each other. They are not necessarily higher or lower than each other. For example, I gave even the example of my own experience where we were like 3 PhD students in the same office, and we were constantly sharing our technical issues, and like some I think they were like maybe 1 year ahead of me or two, but we were like more or less, we had similar experiences, but it was very helpful talking to them and asking for help and discussing things like, and even like sometimes unrelated, but it would have been inspiring on my own research, you know, so, or tackling like troubleshooting experiments and such things. So, but this requires a nice environment in the lab, because I have seen labs where it's such a competitive environment, like competitive not in its good sense, but in a bad sense, that people actually are not helpful towards each other. Like sometimes people are put on similar projects, and the one that actually succeeds will get the attention of the PI. This is horrible, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I've seen that a lot, and I heard a lot. So, but this requires like an environment where people are actually willing to help one another, and this is, I think, the PI's job or the professor's job, in my opinion, to enable such culture in the group where people are actually very helpful towards each other. The boundaries are clear, because human beings, I guess, are competitive, you know better than me, and they can get jealous, or they feel like endangered or something. But if we actually enable an environment where my project is clear, I don't know, your project is clear, you know, we are helping each other, we are not really invading each other's projects or something. So I think this is the group leader's job, in my opinion. And they have a key role in this.
So basically, if we had to write a kind of like recommendations of good practices of supervisors, that would definitely be your recommendation of like ensuring a healthy atmosphere of kind of like peer support among the different people who are under the same supervision.
And I'm glad that now in my postdoc lab is very much the same. And I think I will give the credit to the PI, because, it's basically... it's not bad competition, it's actually positive competition. And like people really wanting to help, wanting to share protocols, to share their experiences. And this is very important, I think, very, very important, because it also brings a lot of motivation when you like your colleagues. When there is a team spirit, at least for me, I like to go to work. Whereas if I have to see this person again, and this person is going to mess up my experiment, for example, or like give me attitude over this or that. So I think this kills a lot of creativity and motivation. I think I'm not in the position yet to judge. I don't have much experience, but so far I can say,
One of the points that definitely comes up very clearly is kind of like the same idea of like supervision is not just you and you supervisors, kind of like this constellation of people that surround you during this phase that are related to you in one sense or another through your supervisor. So I really like that, and I definitely think that hopefully a couple of supervisors might listen to this, or future supervisors, people like you.
We must send the link. So.
Exactly. So maybe the future supervisors or current supervisors might be inspired by this and make the most of it. I think that there's definitely a lot of a win-win kind of situation that can be created if supervisors are actually able to make the most of their own networks of researchers. So that's a really nice point. Hüsnü, in your essay, you speak about the essential part your supervisor played in allowing you and your family to relocate after facing difficulties related to the political situation in Turkey. And in this regard, one of the perspectives I thought that was particularly interesting was the understanding of doctoral supervision not only as an academic endeavor, but equally importantly as a social one. So do you think that this is something most PhD students and supervisors are generally aware of, the fact that supervision is also kind of like an important social constellation, social role?
David, I think my case was a little exceptional. The difficulties that we had back in Turkey actually they were actually apparent, so that I made them apparent to my supervisor during my contact back in Turkey. I explained openly, the condition in which we were, and my interest in continuing my, academic research abroad. I think since I was quite open in terms of my current situation that time and my objectives for the future, he was also quite open and helpful in terms of providing me the help, providing me the assistance to realize my objective. But it could be the same for German supervisor and German students as well. It doesn't have to be a relationship between international and international applicant, a candidate, or a German, a native, I will say, supervisor. A good supervisor should have a basic knowledge of, should have a basic awareness of the social conditions of the applicant or the student himself or herself. And definitely, he or she will decide, to what extent, as a supervisor, he or she could, contribute to the situation of the applicant, the student himself or herself.
And it's mutual. I think it's based on both the supervisor's personality and the PhD candidate personality. I think they do not need to treat necessarily everyone the same, but rather based on their personality. If someone is more ambitious or less ambitious, if someone is, I don't know, there are different PhD candidates out there.
It's always,
and it's very important, to keep everyone motivated and on the track.
It doesn't have to be technical or mechanical. So you're a PhD student, I'm a PhD
like top
supervisor.
To bottom,
So you have to do that, you have to follow these regulations. These are the rules of, achieving a successful, PhD. This sounds too mechanical for me, and this sounds too, I will say, static. There should be a dynamic and interactive.
Absolutely. Okay, so thank you so much for answering my questions. We're practically done by now with the interview, but before we leave, I'd just ask if there's anything else out of the top of your head that you would like to share, any final words of wisdom for other doctoral candidates or potential doctoral candidates, or maybe supervisors. We already heard a couple of them. So any do's and don'ts or anything that you would like to mention that you wish you knew before you started. If not, we can just end this. But if there's anything else you would like to add before we say goodbye, this is your chance to do so.
I think we should say something about the Graduate Academy.
Okay, thank you for the plug.
Institutionally and for you personally, David. So this was something new, and it's the quality of Graduate Academy that comes up with proposals, or it creates chances for the students to express themselves. I think that's also that's another thing that I wanted to share with you and the listeners as well, that Graduate Academy adds value to the academic quality.
Thank you so much for the kind words, definitely.
Well, what are you going to say? I'm going to thank Graduate Academy too. But actually, Graduate Academy has a very special place in my heart because I got my doctoral scholarship from Graduate Academy. So I was funded by Graduate Academy of Heidelberg.
So you had an LGF scholarship?
Exactly, for 3 years. And without that, actually, I wouldn't have any funding to do a PhD. So actually, I wanted to add this. And I think I'm always grateful. It's written in my thesis. I evidence everything.
Okay.
And I'm always very grateful for this chance that Graduate Academy gave me.
Oh, thank you.
And
guys.
keep going and keep actually increasing the number of those scholarships, maybe for future students.
We would love that to just be in our hands. That would be great.
So I guess that's my last words.
Well, thank you guys so much for your time, for stopping by, for sharing your experiences, your wisdom, both as current PhD students and former PhD students. And I wish you the best of luck for your endeavors from now on. And keep in touch. I will let you know when the podcast has finally hit the internet. So thank you.
Thank you very
Goodbye.
much, David.
Thank you.
Thanks.